Assalamualaikum everyone. We will now look at the case of economic recession. What would be the policy pursued by central bank in combating economic recession? Earlier we were looking at the counter-cyclical policy of central banking in the fight to stop inflation, and what would be the action taken by the commercial bank, during which this counter-cyclical policy were pursued by central banking. Would the commercial bank be amplifying or will be neutralizing the inflation or economic recession? So that would be our main concern, and the focus of which, of course, will be on the Islamic bank. For economic recession, I presume that you guys know well what is economic recession. Generally, it is an economic contraction. It is the drop in the GDP, meaning that there is a fall in production. In other words, we got the fall in the use of labor and capital. So during an economic contraction, we can see that people lose their jobs. Thus, unemployment will go up, and businesses goes into bankruptcy, because there is less demand for goods and services. So the business are not able to sell their goods, and many of them will go under. And as a result, of course, of the fall in consumer spending due to the unemployment. And at the same time, when it comes to banking, we can see that many people will default on their loans. The foreclosure and bankruptcy, usually people will lose their homes. And this, big default occurring would prove big losses to the bank, and when the bank are in trouble, they will stop lending to each other, so liquidity will be a great problem during a recession. So overall, the recession is not a good time, and from the Islamic perspective, from the Maqasid Sharia perspective, recession will badly affect the daruriyat, which is the basic necessities of life, which is nafs, nasal, and al-mal. Nafs is life, in a recession, and moving into a big recession, depression. People will live in poverty. People will lose their job. They may even lose their life. Some people, committed suicide due to depression and lack of food. Families will disintegrate because people will lose their jobs, and the family would not be able to sustain their spending, and divorce may occur, and this will destroy the family. And at the same time, we can see that our wealth will be destroyed during a recession and a depression. Stock market will collapse, and your investment will be destroyed, and your life savings will vanish. So these are things that occur during a recession and depression, affecting nafs, affecting our life, affecting our family, and affecting our wealth. So serious is a recession and depression is that the government must intervene to stabilize the economy, through some monetary and fiscal stimulus. But we must be aware that financial institutions such as commercial banks and other entities should not work against government stabilization policy. They should not amplify the recession or amplify the inflation, because if they do, then it will be a great loss, by which financial institution is not cooperating, or they are just not useful to any to the people when when the economy is suffering from this economic instability. So we would like to see what the Islamic Bank will be reacting, towards the procyclical measure pursued by the central bank. Okay, we can look at this illustration number 1. So the central bank under a recession will pursue a counter-cyclical policy. That is from a recession, we want to counter the recession to enter into a recovery. And usually central bank will pursue what we call an expansionary monetary policy, using the existing monetary policy instrument. They may reduce the reserve requirement, they may reduce the discount rate, or from the open market operation, the central bank would usually buy security from the commercial banks to add money into their account so that this money will be used to make more loans. Thus, by doing that, money supply will go up, and thus recovery is a possibility. But this can be frustrated because commercial banks are procyclical. So meaning that during this economic slowdown, the top priority to the commercial bank is to protect the asset from defaulting. So the safety principle is top priority. And thus we can see that the commercial bank is pursuing a pro-cyclical policy by not making loans or making less loan so as to keep their assets safe from default. So this can lead to the hoarding of cash, but there is no policy, to tax this enormous cash holding, and thus we can see that the commercial bank will prefer to earn less money, instead of causing them to face defaults if they were to make more and more loans during a recession. So overall, this procyclical policy of the commercial bank would reduce the money supply and thus making the recession even worse. Now the same applies to the deposit-taking Islamic bank, because as I say many times earlier that the deposit-taking Islamic bank are highly leveraged. They are leveraging on deposit fund to make murabaha, to make tawarruk, and this will require them to be very careful in making tawarruk and mudarabah so that this asset will not get into default, because through leveraging, the central bank require banks to hold adequate capital against the murabaha or the loan they make. So if the Islamic bank wish to do mudarabah, musyarakah, istisna, salam, that can prove to be counter-cyclical. But this contract are highly risky, and it will require the Islamic bank to put huge amount of capital against those risky assets, which the Islamic bank would not be able to sustain. And thus we can see that today the Islamic bank will be making the collateral-based murabaha and tawarruk that serve the same function as any interest-bearing loan that we find in the conventional bank. Thus, at the end of the day, there is greater amount of cash hoarding in the Islamic bank, and there is no zakat imposed on cash hoarding. Even for a year, if the recession extended over more than a year, and the Islamic bank are holding a lot of cash, but that is not zakated, because the Islamic bank will be free doing whatever they want with the cash holding. The Sharia compliant or Sharia governance have nothing to say about this, and that will allow the money supply to further contract, and therefore we see the amplification of recession in Islamic banking. So that is the issue. We do hope that if the Islamic bank can be overhauled, where funding can also come from deposit and partly come from investment account, So the investment account would prove to be counter-cyclical, because these are not leverage funds. These are funds acquired from the investors, and thus the risk appetite can be matching, and this kind of dilution of leveraging can help the Islamic Bank to be a bit more less pro-cyclical and more counter-cyclical, and hoping that this can provide more assistance to the assistance to the central bank in a form of neutralizing the recession, and therefore seeing Islamic Bank to be a potent force in the economic recovery. Inshallah, we can further discuss this matter as we go on. So I see you again. Please don't forget to comment and to subscribe. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Thank you.